Thanks. Happy to see all of you. Unhappy to see so many empty chairs in here. Text your friends or something. Do you think it's because it says privilege back here? People like freaked out? Talking about it? Probably. I'm super happy to be here. To Colin's point, like the fact that I'm here at this place with Colin couldn't have imagined it. Probably because I was like, doing things that bands do back in the day. But it's really, really cool to be standing in front of all of you, and thank you for welcoming me to your community. Before we start, I just want to name, honor, and respect the land that we're standing on that was never ours, that we took from the people who occupied it before, and just take a moment to reflect and honor that we're on sacred land. Did you feel that? That was weird, right? Like accountability is really, really hard. It's particularly hard when we do it in a way that honor and reflects people that don't get talked about all the time in the dominant narrative. But it's kind of like easy to do, and we should just do it more. Just recognize that a lot of the things that we get to enjoy because somebody else had to suffer and sacrifice for it. So next time you have the opportunity to do it, just give it a try. We're going to have an uncomfortable conversation today, as you can see. Power, privilege, and opportunity. Opportunity usually doesn't scare people, but when you start talking about power and privilege and their relationship to opportunity, people like freak out and they don't show up. I'm sure like the World Series on or something. But it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. I'm telling you right now. And that's okay. Because if I left here without you being uncomfortable, then I would have wasted your time. Because we have to grow. As a society, as a community, as a people, we have to grow. And to grow, there needs to be some discomfort. Like if you went to the gym and you left and you didn't feel discomfort, you haven't done anything. If you're trying to like lose weight and you go on a diet, you don't feel discomfort, you're not doing anything. Part of our growth here as a community, as a society, is going to require some discomfort. And so I'm going to ask you, when you feel uncomfortable, if you do feel uncomfortable, not to do the things that we all do when we feel uncomfortable, which is like fold our arms or think about like the counterpoint that you would make or look at your phone or run for the exits. I'm asking you to like sit in that discomfort for 40 minutes because to remove yourself from discomfort is a privilege. Believe it or not, there are people that wake up in this country every single day and they wake up in discomfort. They spend their entire day in discomfort. They go to bed in discomfort. They sleep in discomfort because of all the stuff that they had to put up with that very day. It's because of the way that their skin looks, because of who they've chosen to love or who they've chosen to worship. They're just people who don't have the privilege to like remove themselves from discomfort. So I'm asking you to like think about them and just like sit in it for 40 minutes because all the Netflix will be there after I'm done and you can go find your comfort there. Okay? Cool? I'm actually going to turn this off because this is bothering me. Thanks guys. But I had it up there so you can get my contact information. We'll put it back up there again because I don't have any business cards. So here we go. You ready? Cool. To start this uncomfortable conversation, I want to talk to you about my travel habits. All right. So in the last 3 years, I've flown 2 million miles. 2 million in airplanes. And airplanes to me are like a great exhibit of places of power, privilege, and opportunity because, like when you're flying around, you're in places that's expensive. It's expensive to be up there. And in flying in 2 million miles in the last 3 years, I've become triple, quadruple, platinum status, all black everything, which means that I can get on the plane whenever I want and I can sit wherever I want, except for first class and some other stuff. But given that privilege, I like to be an aisle person. I sit in the aisle and I like to be one of the first people on the plane so I have room for my bag because I don't ever want to check it. And being the aisle person comes with one set of responsibilities. It's you are the gatekeeper of the row. And so you have to stand up when people want to sit down. You have to get up when people want to go to the bathroom. That's it. And as the aisle person, one of the first people onto the flight, I'm usually sort of the gatekeeper for the row. And just 6 months ago, after flying about 1.5 million miles in the last 3 years, I had the occasion to sit in the aisle seat on a basically empty airplane while people were starting to come in, and I was scrolling on Twitter or something like that when somebody came to the aisle and said, "Excuse me, I have to sit down." I said, "Oh, hello." So I stood up and she sat down in the window, and I went back to my Twitter feed. And then a few minutes later, somebody else came to sit down, and he said, "Hello," and I said, "Hello," and he said, "I'm in the middle seat," and I was like, "Oh, that sucks, but all right." So I stood up and he sat down, and we looked across the road at each other, and I don't know if they were thinking about what I was thinking, but what I was thinking was like, man, this is the first time that I've ever sat next to two black people on an airplane. Wakanda. In fact, I've been on planes where there were no black people on my airplane. And I've never sat in first class next to a black person. The only black people I ever see in first class are the people that I recognize from entertainment or sports or music. I've had the opportunity to speak at about 100 colleges, universities, law schools, and grad schools in the last 3 years. I've yet to go to one that has an African American population of 5% or greater. Not black, African American. I've had the opportunity to sit in the C-suite offices of some of the top Fortune 100 companies on the planet, sitting across from the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Bill Gateses and the Jeff Bezoses, Amazon, Airbnb, Google, Uber, you name it. I've been in those offices where millions of dollars are being exchanged. And when I look around those offices, the only people who look like me in those places are the people who are serving the coffee or taking out the trash. I've had the opportunity to speak at some of the best conferences that this planet has to offer. TED, Davos, Skoll, you name it, I've been there. Standing on those stages, looking at audiences. When I look out at the audiences, I'm looking for people who look like me. The only people I ever see are the musical talent. And when I'm looking around at these spaces, I'm looking at people and I'm wondering, like, what are they thinking? Why do they think it looks this way? Did they think that somehow that they were born with a gene that makes them more articulate, and more ambitious, and more intelligent, more creative than me? Or is there something else going on? I'd want you to think about that the next time you're sitting in a classroom and you're thinking about how intelligent you are and how intelligent all the rest of the people in the classroom are, and then look around and be like, who else is not here and why aren't they here? Because I'll tell you, this is like our legacy right now. And it's not getting better. These spaces are getting more homogenous, and this is what our legacy is going to be. This is going to be our generation. And that's a tragedy because we have to start thinking about legacy and what is 50 years from now going to look like if this is the groundwork that we're laying. What is our legacy going to be? And when I think about that, when I think about like what is our legacy going to be, I think about if my legacy in 50 years is going to be this, what is the legacy of the people who interacted with people like me look like 50 years ago? Because we have lots of photographs of that. And when I think about those photographs, the way that we treated people who looked like me 50 years ago, I think about the photographs of 4 little girls who went into a Sunday school one day and never came out again because somebody threw a pipe bomb in their church because they woke up black and nothing happened for decades. I think about the photographs of a 15-year-old boy who was beaten so badly that his mother had the wherewithal to keep his casket open during his funeral so the rest of the country could see what the Deep South had done to her son. I think about the images of 3 young men who looked just like me hanging from trees lit on fire in the middle of a public square in 1967. And when I think about those images, of course I'm thinking about those 4 little girls. Of course I'm thinking about Emmett Till. Of course I'm thinking about those 3 young men hanging from the trees. But the thing that really gets me about those images are all the people standing around the periphery, watching it happen. And if we're not careful, if we don't pick our heads up and look around at the environment that we're creating, we're going to be those people in those pictures 50 years from now, just standing around letting it happen. Why? Because we are in the middle of one of the worst human and civil rights crises ever to happen to our people. We're standing on the forefront right now, and it's happening all around us. I'm talking, of course, about mass incarceration. 2.3 million people in jail and prison, with another 5 million on probation or parole, one misstep away from being part of that larger aggregate number. 1 in 3 black men born today will spend some time in jail or prison. I've already gotten my time out of the way. 1 in 3 black women has a relative in jail or prison. 1 in 6 brown men will spend some time in jail or prison. 1 in 10 Native men will be killed by a police officer. 70 million people walking around out here with a criminal record, a scarlet letter on their chest, making them incapable of integrating into the society the rest of society wants us to be a part of. Maybe they don't. And this isn't just about mass incarceration being a retention problem. 650,000 people come out of prison every single year just to run into 50,000 collateral consequences of felony convictions that keep us under the structures that they built to keep us right where they want us. This also just isn't a criminal justice issue. This hits us at every political and social and educational and health metric you can possibly think of. There's a place on this planet where a black woman is 12 times more likely to die during childbirth than a white woman. It's not in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not in some little island in the West Indies. It's in Manhattan. There's a place on this planet where black women are twice as likely to die of breast cancer than white women, even though the incidence rates are the exact same. Are we okay as a society of saying the result of that, the reason that that happens is because black women somehow care less about their bodies than white women, or is something else going on? The leading cause of death of black men in this country, 18 to 35 years old, is handgun homicide. It causes more death than the next 9 leading causes of death combined for that same age cohort. That is not true of any other people on any other place on this planet except the United States and the islands that surround us in the Caribbean. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what we would do as a country if that was even remotely started to be true about wealthy young girls from the suburbs? We would never let that happen. But we let it happen here. Why? The average household worth of a white family in Boston is $250,000 a year and increasing. Household worth of a black family in Boston is $8 and decreasing. We are an endangered species. There are more segregated schools in this country today than there were on the evening of Brown versus Board of Education. There are more people under correctional control today than there were slaves on the eve of the Civil War. And just to put the finest point on it that I possibly can, researchers estimate that over the 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade, 12 million Africans were captured, enslaved, and killed. Last year, 13 million people went through our jails. We're recreating slavery every single year. This is our legacy. We need a new civil rights movement. I don't know why the last one stopped. A lot of people blame the lack of inertia, or the lack of they blame the inertia on the lack of leadership. We're waiting for the next Malcolm, we're waiting for the next Martin, we're waiting for the next Rosa, someone, anyone, to come and take us to the promised land, but it doesn't come. And every day that we wait, millions more of us are arrested, thousands more of us are incarcerated, thousands more of us die. I can't wait any longer. The good news is, when I come to places like this, when I look out into the faces of the people who are sitting in this room, what I see are not just a bunch of college students and community members who came together for a cause. I see the new civil rights leaders of our time. We'll get back to that. I remember when I was 19 years old, standing in front of a police officer as I handed him thousands of dollars of cash that I had stuffed up into the wall in my bedroom. And I remember handing him the little scraps of marijuana that I had left over from the pounds that I had been trafficking between Central Pennsylvania and Boston. And I remember looking at him and him looking at me and me looking at his face, the look on his face of one of contempt and disgust and frustration that I had become a statistic. And I remember looking at him and thinking to myself like, oh man, I am in trouble. But despite the fact that I was a black man in the United States of America, standing in front of a police officer during the 1990s war on drugs, having just been caught drug trafficking, here's what trouble looked like to me. My mom and dad are going to be really, really mad. They're going to take away my brand new Razr cell phone. You had one of those, didn't you, Colin? Hell yeah, you did. They're going to take away the new pickup truck that I bought with my 17th birthday money, and I remember the other dude who got caught on campus selling weed. He had to move all the way across campus. That was trouble to me. But had I been anywhere else at any other time, here's what trouble should have looked like to me. What I had done was a federal offense. I didn't know that. But I knew I had broken a bunch of state laws, but I didn't know that one of them carried with it a 10-year minimum mandatory sentence. And because of that 10-year minimum mandatory sentence, the likelihood I pled out to that case was about 100%. And in pleading out to that case, I would have given myself the moniker convicted drug felon. And giving myself that moniker, I would have actually deprived myself of the things that keep us safe. The access to housing, the access to employment, the access to education, the access to pro-social activity, the access to transportation, the access to childcare. And in depriving myself of those things, the likelihood I commit another crime actually went up, not down. And each time I re-engaged with the criminal justice system, the likelihood I commit a further more serious crime went up, not down, until at some point I actually victimized another person, at which point the government would have no choice but to send me to prison for double-digit decades, and I never would have had the opportunity to be here. I didn't realize how close I was to the edge of a rabbit hole that millions and millions of people fall down every single year and don't get the opportunity to sit their butts in these seats. I never realized how easily that police officer who wanted to could have pushed me over the edge of that hole and down and I would have fallen. Never having the opportunity to be here. But I didn't. And I am here. I got to go back to college. I graduated from college and went out into the workforce. I worked for 3 years. I came out of the workforce, I went to law school. I went to law school for 3 years. I came out of law school, I went to one of the most prestigious DA's offices in the country. I worked there for 9 years and had a wildly decorated career. So decorated, in fact, that one day John Legend picked up the phone and said, "Hey man, do you want to do a TED Talk?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, John Legend. I would love to do a TED Talk." John and I did a TED Talk and it blew up on the internet, and for the last 3 years we've been traveling the country and the world talking with every celebrity and artist and athlete and activist you can possibly think of about criminal justice reform. In 2015, I had the opportunity to sit with the 44th President of the United States of America in his house and tell him what I thought of his criminal justice policy. Last summer, I sat in Oprah Winfrey's kitchen and let Oprah tell me how dope she thought I was. Oprah. I found out last year that I had a rap lyric, a children's book, and a documentary made about me. And just last year, Nelson Mandela's family named me the Nelson Mandela Changemaker of the Year. I don't do any of those things. I don't tell you any of those things to name drop or for the hype or for the accolades. I'm at Kendrick Lamar. I don't tell you any of those things. I tell you them to make this point. None of that happens. None of that happens if I don't win the lottery. The police officer who pulled me over in my driveway. The police officer who pulled me over was a white man. The police officer who pulled me over was my dad. And after he took me down to the station, he sat me in a cell for a little while, he took me home and he loved me. Just like he did every other time I screwed up after that. Just like somebody loved you every time that you screwed up. Just like, maybe, we need to love the people who come into contact with the criminal justice system just a little bit more when they screw up. The lottery ticket I won didn't happen standing there in the driveway. No. It happened many, many years before that. I was born in a violent, impoverished neighborhood, and I was immediately orphaned, and I spent the first few years of my life in an orphanage. And then one day, two lovely white people from working class suburban Boston came to the orphanage and picked me instead of the other kid. I got to go home with them. I grew up in their white working class neighborhood. I went to white working class schools. I had white working class friends, and that shield of privilege protected me from the bottom of that rabbit hole. And the fact that I spend the rest of my time in prisons and juvenile detention facilities and foster homes and homeless shelters and impoverished neighborhoods, meeting people that are way more articulate, way more ambitious, way more intelligent, way more creative than me, and I get to be here and they don't because they didn't win the lottery, drives me crazy. And it should drive you crazy too. We are never going to know what we've missed out on because of our addiction to mass incarceration. Imagine if the criminal justice system treated formerly incarcerated people like Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King the way that we treat people now. We will never know what we lost out on unless we wrestle ourselves away from this addiction. We will never know who is missing from this auditorium that might be the next great thing. Standing there in the driveway, my father was handing me a sword and a shield. The shield was just that privilege, that protection that kept me from the bottom of that rabbit hole. What I didn't know at the time, but what I learned was that shield wasn't just for me. My privilege could protect anybody that I wanted to. I could extend that thing and put anybody behind it that I needed to. Or even better, I could break off little pieces of my shield and give it to other people, protect themselves. And the sword was for the haters. Because believe it or not, there are some haters out here. There are people who look me in the face and tell me that I should have gone to prison for selling kids weed on college campus in 1999. Even though 8 states are now selling weed to whoever they want to, making billions of dollars doing it. There are so many people that will ask me, how many chances are you going to give these young people? How many chances are you going to give these young people? How many chances are you going to give these young people? And then I ask them, how many chances did you get, Chad? There are people who are talking to me about accountability. You got to hold these people, you got to hold them accountable. You got to hold them accountable. Love talking about accountability until we start talking about everything that we have in this country, everything that we stand on, everything that we enjoy was built on the genocide of one people, the subjugation of another people, and the enslavement of a third people. All of a sudden, the accountability conversation goes out the window. The sword's for the haters. And I didn't know I had these things until I did. When I started using it, amazing things happened. I'm going to tell you about one thing, but here's the pro tip. It had nothing to do with becoming a prosecutor. It had everything to do with recognizing that I had privilege. And it changed the game. So here's the thing. You sitting in this room right now, you being part of this community, whatever that means to you, gives you privilege. So if you reach down in your pocket right now, let me tell you, you have a sword and a shield down there too. All you need to do is ask yourself every single night you go to bed, did I use my shield to protect someone that couldn't? And I use my sword to fight out the haters that weren't letting that person. And if you did, you're using it right. And you can sleep tight. I'll tell you how I chose mine. This is just one example. I met Stanley when he was 16 years old for the first time he came into my courtroom. I'd gone from prosecuting gang shootings down to the juvenile unit because I was trying to catch young people before they got tied up into the adult system. So I went from prosecuting really serious cases to prosecuting Stanley, who was stealing a cell phone. I had no idea why young people were stealing cell phones at the time, but it was happening a lot. It was happening so much that we called it apple picking. And what was happening was young people were just waiting for stupid commuters on the train to be looking like zombies down at their phone, and the train would come to a station, a group of young kids would snatch the phone and run away. It's happening every day. Why was it happening? Because Apple, in their infinite wisdom to save us privileged people time, when your phone needed an upgrade, you used to have to put it into this thing called the package and put a thing called a stamp on it and send it in this thing called the mail back to Apple to get your rebate back. And Apple was like, no, we want to make it easier for you to get your money back. We want it easier for you to get your new iPhone. So they put vestibules throughout the city of Boston that would allow you to put your iPhone in the vestibule and it would just spit out $150. It immediately created an economy that Stanley and the young people in our community could participate in. Because lo and behold, for those of you out here who's like, Stanley, get a job, the days of getting a paper route or cutting the grass or babysitting the neighbor's kids are gone. And so Stanley was participating in an economy that he could. And so there I was, Mr. Woke Prosecutor, and I said something like, Stanley, this is bad. How dare you? This is bad. You could go to jail, Stanley. Shame on you. I could lock you up, but I'm not going to because I'm woke. So go home with that very stern talking to. Think about what you've done. You're welcome. And Stanley left. A few months later, Stanley came back into the courtroom, this time because he had stolen a Vespa. You guys have Vespas out here? Everybody know what a Vespa is? See a few people. All right, really quickly. Boston, like every other city in this country, is rapidly gentrifying, and with the gentrifiers comes their gentrifier starter pack. Sign number one that you have a gentrification problem. The craft wine, cheese, beer store that all of a sudden shows up in the hood. Sign of a gentrification problem number 2, French bulldogs. Named after authors that none of these people have read. Oh, Hemingway. Tell me one book, dude. Sign of a gentrification number 3, Vespas. The cute little Italian red scooters that they drive down to their new WeWork tech jobs and take up our parking spots. What they didn't tell the gentrifiers at the Vespa store was that Vespas are really easy to hotwire. It's red wire, green wire, go. In Stanley community, in my community in Dorchester, there are fences that you can drive those Vespas behind, and some OGs will take that off of you for $200 and never ask you where you got it from, and they'll chop it up and sell it for parts. They didn't tell the gentrifiers that either. And so lots of young people started stealing Vespas. And there I was, Mr. Woke Prosecutor, and I was like, Stanley, what did I tell you? This is bad. This is extra bad because it's more expensive. How dare you? You are so bad. This is worse, badder. This is bad. You're bad. I swear to God, I'm going to lock you up, but not today because I'm woke. So go home. But remember what I told you. And Stanley left. I was committing the fatal error that we do as people with privilege, particularly people with privilege with like lots of initials after their name. I was telling the person who was most impacted by decisions what they needed to be doing instead of asking him what he needed from me. And luckily, but also sadly, I had the opportunity to ask Stanley what he needed from me because very shortly thereafter, he was back in my courtroom. This time, though, he did not come in the front door, he came in the back door. This time, he was not in the street clothes, he was in an orange jumpsuit, ankle shackles, handcuffs, and a waist chain, all tied together like Hannibal Lecter. Stanley, over the course of that weekend, posed as someone on Craigslist interested in purchasing motorcycles. And he convinced 2 different men to drive up to Dorchester with motorcycles on the back of their pickup trucks to pick up Stanley and his accomplice. He then convinced those men to drive out to the back of a golf course where Stanley and his accomplice would help the men get the motorcycles off their pickup trucks, only to have Stanley's accomplice raise up his jacket, revealing what appeared to be a gun. And Stanley said to those men, "You should probably leave," and they did. Stanley then took those motorcycles back behind those same fences and walked out with a substantial amount of money. We'd gone from apple picking to Vespa stealing to 2 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of possession of a firearm, 2 counts of assault with a dangerous weapon with 2 white male victims. One of those was a life felony. You stack all 6 of those charges on each other, there are not enough numbers that we can count to express the number of years that Stanley was facing. And I was like, after all of those speeches that I gave you, like, what? What happened? And I took that opportunity for the first time to be like, actually, I want to know what happened. Like, I want to ask this young person, what happened? What do you need? So I asked the correctional officer to take all this gear off. I'm like, he's not a serial killer. Like, come on. And then I asked if I could take him out of lockup and have a conversation with him. And so we went into a little conference room, and I sat there with Stanley and his attorney and asked him, tell me what happened. For those of you who are like involved in the legal system and you're thinking to yourself, like, what? You're a prosecutor and you're asking this dude the day of his arraignment what happened? Don't worry. This wasn't me like investigating the case. I had all the evidence that I needed to convict Stanley of all of those things. Because Stanley, turns out, was really bad at committing armed robbery. He used his own email address, stanleyvargas98@gmail.com, to set up the Craigslist purchases. Then he used his own cell phone to text the men to give them directions to his house. And then, if that wasn't enough, when Stanley got on those motorcycles and was driving them back to the chop shop, he looked so good that he couldn't help. Posted pictures of himself on Facebook, on the motorcycles, at the scene of the crime with his accomplice. So this wasn't like an investigatory journey. Like, I knew what happened. Stanley had made my entire case for me. I literally wanted to know, like, what did I miss? Like, how did this happen? How do we go from stealing a cell phone to going to prison for life? Stanley didn't tell me about the gang that he was trying to jump into. He didn't tell me about some gang he was trying to jump out of. He didn't tell me about some like weird international motorcycle stealing ring that I just missed. Stanley told me about being 9 years old and his parents making the decision to emigrate to the United States of America from the Dominican Republic because his family wanted to give him and his two older brothers a better shot at an education. And where would you go for that except for Boston? And how at 9 years old, he recognized the sacrifice that his parents were making, cutting themselves off entirely from this network, this community, this island nation they had grown up on, to leave and move to this foreign place just to give Stanley and his two brothers a better life. And how at 9 years old, when he got to Boston, even though he had grown up in a developing nation, he had never seen the kind of poverty and trauma and violence that he did when he got to the Fidelis projects in Brighton. The violence and that poverty and that trauma started to work its way through the cracks in the apartment building and take his family members one by one. It first came for his oldest brother. Stanley worshipped his oldest brother. He was the smartest guy in school, was super good looking, but as soon as they got to the United States of America, his oldest brother stopped coming home from school and stopped coming home for curfew. Sometimes wouldn't come home at all. Stanley would see him out in the street dressed in all sorts of nice gear and never knew where it came from. How'd you get these nice new Jordans? What the hell? Until one night the federal government made it very clear when they kicked down the family's door, arrested his oldest brother, and sent him to federal prison for drug trafficking at the age of 19, the same thing that I had done. They next came for Stephen, Stanley's next oldest brother. Stephen and Stanley were very close in age, and they played together all of the time, but when they got to the United States, that play became rough, and that roughness became violence, and that violence began to manifest not just on Stanley, but on his parents, and then on classmates and teachers, and then finally in the streets. And Stephen was involved in a gang shooting, and he went to prison at 17 years old. Stanley told me about the morning that he woke up and he found out that his father, in the middle of the night, had left and gone back to the Dominican Republic, a broken and ashamed man, that he had exposed his family to the American dream, and it turned out to be the American nightmare. Stanley told me about finding his mother one day on the ground in their apartment building, crying and throwing up, not because she was sad, not because she was sick, but because she was so exhausted from trying to keep everything together. Stanley told me about the feeling of putting $8,000, the $8,000 that he got from the sale of those motorcycles, on his mother's table and rubbing, saying, "I've got you. I've always got you. You never have to worry. I'm going to take care of you." I was like, I understand that. I feel that. I feel that right now. But you can't be out here robbing people. You can't be out here with guns. Weren't you afraid of the police? Weren't you afraid of getting caught? Weren't you afraid of going to prison? I'm supposed to send you to prison for life right now. Stanley looked at me and he was like, "Is that what you people think? Is that what you think? Do you think that when I was out there robbing those men, I was thinking about prison? I was worried about my mother dying. Do you think that when my friends put guns in their pants to go to school, we're worried about the 18 months in the house of correction that you might give me if I get caught with a gun? No. I'm thinking about the very real consequence of what might happen if I get caught out here without a gun." Stanley leaned back in his chair and he said to me, "Bro, the criminal law is for the land of the living. We're out here just trying to survive." The best piece of legal education that I ever got did not come from the $150,000 piece of paper that sits on my wall. It came from a 17-year-old kid sitting in an orange jumpsuit, wearing ankle shackles, and reading at about a 5th grade level. That is the opportunity that we have every single day when we're surrounded by people who are impacted by these bad things that we're doing to them. Stanley gave me a gift that day. And as a result, I felt obliged to give him one back. So I reached down in my pocket, and I pulled out my sword and my shield. I said, all right, Stanley, I need two things from you today. One, I need you to tell me where it is that you want to be in life. What do you want, like, where do you want to be? Because right now, it's state prison. Stanley said, I want to graduate from high school. My family gave up everything so that one of us can graduate. I want to be the one. Also, baseball makes me feel good. I'm good at it. I like being part of that group. That's what I want. I want to play baseball. But everybody at school treats me like garbage because of my brothers and my reputation, so my grades aren't any good and I can't get on the team. I want to play. And you know what else? I want to go to college. I want to go to college. And I want to stand there at graduation saying that I'm a college graduate. And either way, at the end of the day, if I'm a college graduate or a professional baseball player, I want to buy my mother a house and get her out of the hood. Raise your hand if that sounds like the life plan of a violent and serial felon that I needed to send to state prison that day. I didn't think so either. So I said, all right, number two, what I need from you, I need you to write me a list of everything that you need to do to get from where it is you are right now to where it is that you want to be. Write you a list too because I'm the prosecutor and I need some certain things from you. Stanley's list looks something like this. Wake up on time. Go to school. Stay there. Pay attention. Do my homework. Practice. Play hard. Be nice to my friends. Be nice to my mom. Don't be a pain in the ass. Stay away from the police. My list looked remarkably similar. Except at the top of the list, number one, we're going to get the victim's stuff back. See, the intervention was happening within 18 hours of the crime happening, and as a result, we could work with Stanley to go and get the victim's stuff back and give it back to them, something that almost never happens in the criminal justice system. And once we did that, guess what? They were like, we're good. But I wasn't good yet. So number two, you're going to apologize. You're going to apologize to these men if they'll have you. Or we're going to find some other people who have been harmed in this way so you can understand the gravity of the harm that you caused, because it's not just about the motorcycle, Stanley. You've disrupted their community and their safety, and I need you to know that. I need you to understand that deeply, but I also need you to understand that you are not defined by the worst thing that you've done. It's called restorative justice, Stanley. And you're not just going to be accountable with your words by saying, I'm sorry, you're going to be accountable by your actions. You're going to do things to show that you've understood your harm and you're trying to repair it. You're going to do community service every day until your hands bleed. And I'm not talking about the kind of community service we're going to put you on a bus with the OGs to pick up trash on the sidewalk. I'm talking about the kind of community service you can put on a resume and be proud of. But don't worry, there's going to be an adult that cares about you, who's going to help you, that wants to see you succeed. Anytime there's an academic lecture that I want you to go to, you're going to go and I'm going to get you there. And don't worry, there's going to be an adult that cares about you, that loves you, that wants to see you succeed. Anytime there's a book reading or a documentary screening that I want you to go to, you're going to go. But don't worry, I'm going to get you there, and there's going to be an adult there that cares about you, that loves you, that wants to see you succeed. You're going to write, you're going to reflect, you're going to journal, you're going to essay, you're going to talk about this harm every single day. You're going to do it every single day until I say stop. And I'll say stop when you cross that first finish line that you set for yourself, when you walk across that graduation stage. I'll be the first person standing there saying, congratulations, Stanley Vargas, your case is over. But for today, you're going to go home. And Stanley left. That was one example of me exercising my sword and my shield, and an opportunity that I had to do it tens of thousands of times, and the payoff is so much greater than ever winning a trial as a prosecutor. And each one of us, wherever we choose to go from this room on the outside, you will run into a Stanley somewhere. Hopefully it won't be in a courthouse. Because despite the very, very unique things that make Stanley who he is, there's lots of things that Stanley has in common with most of the people that I meet who are sitting in jails and juvenile detention facilities and prisons. And it doesn't start with some like moral failing that they came up with on that day. It starts way down here. Because what we know now is that children conceived to mothers who are living in poverty inherit toxic stress through their DNA while they're incubating. It changes the way their DNA develops, their bones develop, their brains develop, and all of those changes lead to early problems, early interactions with the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, in prison. Those are unborn children telling us, hey, psst, if you put your money and your resources down here, if you exercise your sword and your shield down here, you might save me from going to prison. But we don't. We wait. Those children then born in the same communities that their mothers were suffering toxic stress in, and those children start suffering it acutely. We call them adverse childhood experiences. It's a whole other conference on that. But the 101 version is, the more of those that you have, the tougher life is going to be for you. In fact, in 2015, of the 800 kids who were locked up in Massachusetts juvenile detention facilities across the state, 75% of them had, on average, 3 interactions with the child welfare system before the age of 3. Let me say that again. 75% of the kids who were locked up in Massachusetts in 2015 had, on average, 3 interactions with the child welfare system before the age of 3 for abuse, neglect, and malnutrition. Those are nonverbal children telling us, hey, psst, if you put your resources in down here, if you use your sword and your shield down here, you might save me from going to prison. But we don't. We wait. Those children then go into the first grade in those communities, and by the first time they've reached the first grade in those communities, they've been read to, on average, 18 hours. Children in more affluent communities, and I literally mean the community across the street, by the time they've reached the first grade, they've been read to, on average, 1,200 hours. Children in our communities have heard 30 million fewer words than children in other communities, and that gap in cognition, that gap in literacy, that gap in the development of feeling that an adult cares about you enough to sit down with you for a half hour and read every day, leads to, you guessed it, early problems in school, early interactions with the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, in prison. Those are little kids being like, hey, psst, if you put your money down here, if you put your resources down here, if you just sit down and pick up a Dr. Seuss book down here, you might keep me from going to prison, but we don't. We wait. Those children then enter the next developmental phase in our life, and it's one that we don't talk about enough, but it's really, really important. It's that transition at 7, 8, or 9 years old where we stop expecting kids to learn how to read, and we expect them to learn from reading. And it's that important because this is the way that you're evaluated for the rest of your life. And if you don't have the foundation, it's very difficult to build the rest of the house. And so when you're 7, 8, or 9 years old and you're having a very hard time in class comprehending what's going on, not because you're stupid, not because you're black or brown or poor or autistic, but because you never had the opportunity to learn the very fundamental skill that it's going to take, it frustrates you when you're getting evaluated poorly. And when you're 7, 8, or 9 years old and you don't have the language to express your frustration that this is happening, it manifests in behavior. We act up, we act out, we run around, we're the class clown, we're the class problem, we're asleep in class, we don't come to class, we're out in the hallway, we're out in the yard. And what do we do as adults who are paid to get these kids across the finish line? Do we say, we're sorry for depriving you of the opportunity to learn how to do this very important skill? No. We blame them. We shame them. We label them. We suspend and expel them. If you suspend a black boy between the ages of 8 and 12 one time in this country, you increase the likelihood they drop out by 50%. We are saying to these children, you're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. This is what the good kids do. This is what the good kids look like. These are the grades the good kids get. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. You're a bad kid. All we are doing is reinforcing the message to them that their life matters less. And we tell them that every single day that they go to school, on the way to school, while they're at school, on the way home from school, and oftentimes in their own homes. And then they enter the next developmental phase of their life that we call adolescence, the time that we are biologically engineered to find who it is that we want to spend the rest of our time with. We reject adult supervision and replace it with people who are just like us. And we do that by taking data from the outside world and figuring out who it is that we are going to be. For the good kids, we sanction that. We love that. We want you to do that. Find the other people that are just like you. Make a football team or debate club or a theater group or the science club. Love that. We'll have ceremonies or awards and graduations. But at the same period of time, we're handing these young people the autonomy to decide whether or not they want to come back to their particular building anymore. And for the kids who feel unsafe on the way there, on the way home, and while they're there, they're just being told that they're bad, they decide, you know what, this place isn't for me anymore, and we have a word for that too. We call them dropouts. And what do we do as adults? We're paid to get these young people across the finish line because we know that good things happen when they get across the finish line. What do? Do we apologize? We do everything in our power we can to get them back in? No. Like, oh, thank God, now we can concentrate on the good kids. And those young people disengaged from school are still adolescents. They still require that need to find other people that are just like them. And lo and behold, they do that out in the street. And they find it in other people who, just like them, have been rejected their entire lives. And for them, that connection is so much more important because for the first time when they meet those people, it's the first time they felt anything that feels like love or accountability or respect or protection. And if you're poor, and particularly if you're poor and a person of color, we have a word for that too. We call that a gang. And when someone visits violence on that young person, or this group of people who are the only people that have shown them love and protection and loyalty, and we respond with violence, not because they're black or brown or poor or stupid, but because we let them live in an environment where violence is the way that you resolve everything. We let them live in an environment where it's easier to get a handgun than it is to get a job. We let them live in an environment where more of their friends have died this year on the streets than any combat veteran coming back from Afghanistan or Iraq. When they respond with violence, that's when we say as adults, okay, young person, now I see you. Now I will spend all of the money in the world. Now I will spend all of my resources to find you, prosecute you, and lock you up for the rest of your life. Shame on you. In this society, in this state, we have made the collective decision that we would rather spend $11 million to lock up an 18-year-old black boy for killing another 18-year-old black boy for the rest of his life than to take that $11 million and put it down here somewhere. That is our legacy right now. Let that sit on you for a moment. How did we get to a place where we would rather spend the money down there than down here? What does that say about people who look like me? More importantly, what does that say about people who don't? You're going to leave this place someday with a piece of paper that gives you a tremendous amount of power. You already have it being in this space, but the opportunity for you to do something about that pipeline is right in front of you. And I'm asking you, I'm begging you to do it. Just reach your arm in and grab one person out, whether it's your Stanley or someone else, just do it. And you don't have to be a prosecutor to do it. It's just anyone with privilege or power. Just figure out your space that you're going to just reach your arm in and say, no, not today. I'm going to use my shield from protecting you from going anywhere further down this pipeline. Because when you do, amazing things can happen. So, shortly after my meeting with Obama, did I mention that I met with Obama? Shortly after my meeting with Obama, I had a much more important meeting. I got to sit with a young man as he signed his letter of intent to play Division III baseball at a school in New Hampshire. And in sitting with that young man, I had the opportunity to see what happens when you exercise your sword and your shield. Because a few months later, that young man texted me and said, hey, bro, I did it. I said, what'd you do, Stanley? Stanley became the first freshman in his college to start in the national championship game for Division III baseball as the starting pitcher. He pitched for 8 innings, 11 strikeouts, 2 hits, lost, but his feeling of being that dude on that day was better than anything I could ever have given. A few months after that, Stanley texted me again and he said, bro, I think somebody's playing a trick on me. I said, why? Up until this point, Stanley is now a sophomore. Up until this point, he had never received a piece of mail that wasn't a warrant or a summons. And on this day, somebody slid an envelope under the dorm room door that he was staying in. When he opened it, it said, congratulations, Stanley Vargas, you made the dean's list. When I asked him why he felt someone was playing a trick on him, he's like, bro, I've never seen an A or B on my report card. Not even in gym. I said, no, Stanley, you're winning. You're succeeding. What do you think it's about? He's like, I don't know, my environment. New Hampshire sucks, but imagine if grown people just took more of their time helping young people do good things instead of trying to catch them do bad things. There's another profound pearl of wisdom from Stanley. Last year, Stanley was a junior now. I received an award from the Massachusetts Bar Association, and they asked me, hey, can you get like one of your famous friends to come and introduce you to receive this award? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. So he did.
Families are being broken up, and kids are growing up with no fathers because of one slight mistake that was made to try and better their family situation at the moment. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on criminal justice system, which is more than housing, education, and public health combined. For what? For jails, it's not working. People are getting out. People are getting out way worse than what they went in. Instead of helping these people build better mindsets for when they get out, the system is literally destroying them. We can't solve this problem until people from impacted communities, my communities, have a seat at the table.
During that speech, Stanley announced that he had been scouted by 3 Major League Baseball teams and that he was looking at law schools because he wanted to go to law school, because he wanted to be a prosecutor, because he thinks he can do a better job than me. And I totally agree with him, because he gave me one of the best lessons I ever learned in life. When we create seats at the table for impacted people, all of us get better. I never want you to look at an empty seat the same way again and understand that we are missing out on something because someone from a community that didn't win the lottery is not sitting here. And each one of us has the opportunity, the responsibility to do something about it with that privilege that we were given. And we have to. We have to, because this is our legacy. Because in 50 years from now, people are going to be looking at images of today the same way that we look at images of 50 years ago. And they're going to be looking at those images and they're going to be thinking to themselves like, what? Number 1 in mass incarceration? Number 1 in mass shootings? Number 1 in racial and ethnic disparities at every place that you possibly look? What? When they're looking at those images, they're going to be looking and being like, what were you doing? Why were you just standing there? I would have done something. Why aren't you doing something? And when they're asking those questions of you, how do you want to be remembered? Because Martin Luther King said, in the future, it's not the words of your enemies you remember, it's the silence of your friends. So when people are asking those questions of you, do you want to be remembered as someone who just remained silent? Just flew around in first class? Or do you want to be remembered as someone who woke up every single day just trying to bring a little bit more humanity and dignity to the world? Who woke up and thought about that young mother living in poverty, or that young kid who was suffering adverse childhood experiences, that young kid trying to learn how to read, or those kids being disengaged from school, or those other kids looking for their gang, which is just another word for team, or those young people who've done something bad and now they're locked up and they need your help. Those people are coming out on the back end and all they want to do is be part of the community. What are you going to do? Are you going to give voice to the voiceless? Are you going to give power to the powerless? Are you going to use your sword and your shield every single time that you have the opportunity to do so? Are you going to be remembered as one of the new civil rights leaders of our time? I guarantee you, if you pick the latter, if you join my gang, wherever you are in 50 years from now, you'll be remembered as one of the happiest, wealthiest people that has ever lived. Thank you very much.
So we have time for questions, and for the sake of the video that's being made tonight, we'll try to get those questions on the microphone, so I'll come around with that, and if anybody would like to start, the floor is open.
I took a red eye from LA last night to be here, so like let's ask questions. Thank you, sir. And you can shout it out. Shout it out and I'll repeat it.
I am from Wellesley, Massachusetts.
Yes.
And from your experience working in Boston, have to imagine you know a place like Wellesley. I come from an incredible place of privilege. I'm here at Williams because I went right out of Wellesley High School, which is basically a private school that I pay just taxes for living in Wellesley for. And I'm kind of wondering what you think, what you think a student like me has compared to and the power I have, and can that be equal to a student like Stanley? Because we have very different experiences, and for me to understand Stanley's, if we both end up being prosecutors, even in Boston, it's going to take a lot farther for me to go to understand how I can help.
Totally. Great question. Give it up for that guy. So one, like you're already doing the work. Like the way that you're like able to articulate this question lets me know that you're already like much of the way there. And so I want to appreciate you and respect you for that. Two, everything that you do from now until whenever you decide it is what you want to do for retirement, immerse yourself in other people's culture. Like when you are thinking about how you show up in the world, whether that's volunteering, whether that's just going to a different neighborhood, whether that's watching content that isn't something that you normally imbibe, do it and like think about it. It's going to make you uncomfortable. It's not going to feel good. It might feel scary, but like understand that for a lot of people, that's just the way that life is. And so allow yourself that discomfort because amazing, like wonderful things will happen. Like you'll learn, like Roxbury and Dorchester actually used to be like beautiful places. Beautiful places. Yeah, was there crime there? Absolutely, but there was such a beautiful and vibrant community there. And lots of us missed out on it because we were afraid of what might happen if we went there. The other thing is recognize that like of all the people in the room, you have the most amount of privilege to make space for others. And so wherever you go in life, don't ever forget that there are other people who would love to be where you are. And if you can just do one or two things every single time you have the opportunity to do so, to make sure that you're like making room for that person to be there, by challenging other people that look like you in the space that you are to say like, hey, maybe we should like start a book club and talk about this content. Maybe we should go volunteer this weekend at this place, not because we're like into trauma porn, but because I actually want to learn about that community. And just like commit yourself to doing that. You don't have to do it every day. You got other things going on. I'm not asking you to like sacrifice your whole life. I'm not even telling you like throw yourself into public service work. If you want to go work at like the biggest bank, great. Just make sure you're not going there without understanding the history of banking in this country and what you can do to make sure that that never happens again. If you want to go work and build hotels and housing, cool. I'm into that. But never go and do that without understanding the history of housing in this country and what that's done to rooms like this. Just immerse yourself in the true and real history of the United States and be an ambassador for that in the spaces that we can't get. Because there will be places that you can get that other people can't. And when you are in those places, it's really easy to just go along with the crowd. It's real easy. It's hard, it's brave, you need gear, you need a sword and a shield to do the other thing, which is like, don't use that language. Don't say those things. Don't make this woman uncomfortable. Don't talk about this person that way. Honor the land that we're on. Like, do the things, do the work. But you are my hope, man. You really are. And I appreciate you asking the question. It was very brave. What else? My brother.
Hi, Janelle. So I'm also from California. Thank you for speaking. Thank you for sharing.
All right.
And my question more relates to basically your example of Stanley and the way you were able to mentor him and be in his life and see how he's grown. I just sort of wanted to ask, how are you able to sort of, as someone in your position and with your journey with Stanley, how would you sort of use your power, your sword and shield, to stay in that person's life when there's like a physical separation? So like you mentioned, like being able to have an adult that cares about them, be at these sort of things that you recommend for him to go through and be with him sort of every step of the way.
Yep.
Like I know for myself personally, like I'm a very face-to-face physical kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
Barely talk to my parents as much as they hate it.
Yeah.
So over the phone, not like in person.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so I know personally that's something I struggle with. And so let's say I have a Stanley who is the same way. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So great question. All these young men are young men that I quote unquote prosecuted for guns, and by prosecuted, I mean I did not prosecute them. I kept them out in their communities and worked with them in their communities. I would love to tell you that every person on this very outdated collage is doing well. I lost one young man to homicide, I lost the other one to incarceration, but the rest of them are in college or working. And like most young people, they don't actually want to see me. They don't want to see me. We text most of the time. We talk once in a while. Typically, if we're on the phone, it means something bad is happening. But it's just, again, to my friend up there, the answer is just like committing to the work that like you have to force the interaction. And if young people are incarcerated, a lot of people that I work with are incarcerated, that's just like doing the shitty thing that it is to like go visit a prison. And for anybody who's interested in this topic and anybody who's talking about reform out here, please don't jump into this work until you have the opportunity to step inside a correctional facility. If you're a person who's just like, I'm about criminal justice reform, you are not doing as good a job as you can unless you've stepped inside of a prison or a facility. And that takes time. It takes sacrifice of your own time. It takes transportation to get there. It takes up a bunch of your day because like the traffic in and out of prison is slow and inconvenient. But that amount of time that you spend there not only is giving people a sense of community that will help them in their reentry process, but it also is like doing a ton of stuff for you. And you don't have to take my word for it. There's lots of students that I met in this room that have and continue to spend a lot of time in correctional facilities. They'll tell you. They'll tell you how fulfilling that is, and they'll tell you how to get in. And so it's really about just like making the commitment in this world where everything is just like, we only communicate through phones now. It's making the commitment to understand that human contact, human connection is the best way to keep someone from recidivating. And as a person who cares about like public safety and all the things that we say as prosecutors, it's just about making that commitment to do that at every moment that I get the opportunity to do so. And the way that I do that now is when I have trainings for prosecutors around the country, I buy plane tickets for young men to come and do the trainings with me. Because my whole thing is about like giving other people their shields. Stanley giving a speech in front of 4,000 lawyers at the Mass Bar Association, standing there in a suit, was my opportunity to be in physical proximity to Stanley, but it was also to like move away from that platform and let Stanley give that speech. Because I could have given that speech, but it's way better come from Stanley. So it's just making the commitment and understanding that like my $200 that I'm spending on flying somebody to a place to do a training will pay off much bigger dividends, and I would have spent that $200 on like 2 dinners with my girlfriend. Next question. I saw one here and one back there.
I was wondering how you deal with a situation when you pull out your sword and your shield and you hand your shield, you share it, and it doesn't work. And you feel like you failed, and you feel like you're giving up, and what do you do?
Yeah. One, I'd ask like parents how they felt, because I'm sure that they have this experience all the time. They're just like, what, are you kidding me, again? We lose sight of this. We've like created this image that there's like those people in the criminal justice system who like, how many chances do we give them? And then there's the rest of us. And the best example that I can give of this is I'm sitting there in juvenile court. I'm like filling out a file. This other dude that I went to law school with is a prosecutor. He is standing in front of the judge, and he is, lambasting this kid who he gave a chance to, and the kid screwed up. He's just saying all these things like, I gave you a chance, and you snubbed your nose at the law, and blah, 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 I'm gonna lock you up. And I'm looking at him, and I was like, bro, I went to law school with you. And I remember like the law school ski trip, and you were like blowing lines in the bathroom. Like, let's not get it twisted. All of us are out here screwing up. It's about who gets caught and who doesn't. And then it's about our culture, about forgiveness and understanding that like when you've lived a life that is defined by poverty and trauma and loss, and just because like the mighty and benevolent prosecutor gives you a chance and you don't come correct on that chance, that is not our opportunity to be like, that's your fault. We have to have a much broader spectrum of like patience, because all of us are sitting in a place where we give people lots and lots and lots of chances to screw up. And we are okay with doing that because we know that you're going to walk out of here with a diploma. And so the administration here will do whatever they can to keep people on the campus when they screw up as many times as they can, because at the end of the day, it looks better for them to be graduating. And then we know that when we hand them that diploma, at that time in their life, the likelihood they screw up is very low. So when I'm looking at these young people, and I've given you an opportunity, so like Stanley, for example, Stanley commits an armed robbery. I divert him. Everybody's like, you're crazy. And then Stanley gets arrested about 6 months later. And the probation officer and the judge and all these people are like, I told you so. Send him to prison. Stanley was arrested for malicious destruction of property of $250 and criminal trespass. Why? That's recidivism, by the way. We call that recidivism. That's a metric that we use to see if someone's been successful. Stanley's crime, he had finally gotten onto the baseball team. And in Boston Public Schools, if you show up to school late, the doors are locked, and so you can't come to school, so you miss that day at school. And for the baseball team that he was playing on, if he wasn't in school for 5 consecutive days before the game, he couldn't play. So Stanley got to school as a 17-year-old kid. The doors were locked because he was late. And he was like, if I don't get in school, I can't play in the game this weekend. So let me creep around the back of the school, break the window in the gym door, reach inside and let myself into school and just like sneak into class. And they caught him and they arrested him. And everybody's like, you gave him a chance and he blew it. And I was like, hey, he's in school. He wants to be in school so bad he's breaking in. Like, let's just pause for a minute and like parse out like what is failure and what is not. And so as long as like, if I prosecute a kid for a shooting and I keep him on the street and he like shoplifts, we're good. We're going like this. And the reason that this is good, I wish I had the graph. There's a FBI crime graph that looks like this. And that graph is, the axis is age, and the y-axis is offenses. And so there's just a period of time in our lives when we do really, really risky things. And that period of time shortens with every year that passes until at the age of 25, most people have worked that stuff out, and so they're not going to commit crime anymore. And we've created places where we like foster that. We're like, yeah, come here and screw up. Go to class once in a while if you want to, whatever. But like, screw up. It's okay in here. But if you don't get the opportunity to be here, if you don't get the lottery ticket to be here, and you're trying to do that on the outside, then like we have police for you. And so like, let's remove ourselves from this conversation about like chances or no chances. Just like, well, Chad got 28 of them. Why doesn't Stanley? Because Stanley's not at Williams? Come on, man. Question in the back.
Hi, my name's Jackie Latimer. I'm from Clarksburg, Massachusetts.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. This has been great. I am working with DA Harrington on the Juvenile Justice Committee. So I function as a pediatric RN in the primary care in this area. And I think one of the things I'd like to see if a little insight is kind of what we have been discussing as a group is about getting the diversion programs up and going and getting the community to accept this as a way of, bettering these children.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you had any insight about trying to get the community more involved in how the operation would work.
Yeah. So like, we're paying a ton of money for this abject failure. We're paying a ton of money for our criminal justice system. Billions and billions of dollars in just like the structure and the staff. And then when you talk about lost GDP, you're in the trillions of dollars. And that's coming out of our pockets. Right? Not just like black people and poor people, everybody's pockets. Everybody's losing. And what have we gotten for that? We've gotten the highest incarceration rate on the planet. We have one of the highest crime rates on the planet. We are one of the most violent countries on the planet. And we have the highest recidivism rate out of any other country on the planet. And that's what people are spending their money on. Instead of, we could take a fraction of that money, and keep kids healthy, with proper nutrition, proper sleep, in a good school where they feel safe, And the output of that, not only does it cost us less money, but we're now making money. And so like, I wish that I could just go into communities where people are like, no, you're bullshit, and say like, this is really inhumane. Like just step into a prison, you'll see that this is not a good thing. But I can't, and so you have to go to their incentives. So one way is like through the incentive door of the money conversation. The other thing that has been left out of this conversation is that all of these people are out here who are saying that we need to protect victims, which are a lot of the community members who have a very hard time with like the reform conversation. It's like, what about the victims? The challenge that I have for them is like, you tell me what about the victims? Because for anybody working in the criminal justice system, we know like there's a dirty truth that we don't treat victims that well. There are 51% of people in this country that won't pick up the phone when they're harmed in their community because they would rather not have the police come to their door. So we're already missing half of the population of people who are harmed. We're not even getting to those victims. None of the other half, another 25% of them are gone like the day after they call the police because they don't want to come to the arraignment, they want to come to grand jury. They don't want any more help than just like that immediate interaction with law enforcement. And so now you're down to a fraction of the population, 25%, that will actually be there after grand jury. And on the slow and arduous process of the criminal justice system where it takes like 2 years for cases to process through the system, we keep sending them letters being like, don't worry, something's gonna happen. Don't worry, something's gonna happen. Don't worry, something's gonna happen. And then something happens, and usually that thing, it has nothing to do with them, it has everything to do with the prosecutor. They're like, well, what the hell was that? And so once in a while, we serve victims pretty well. And those victims, more often than not, look like the dominant narrative, the people who have the loudest megaphones about victims' rights. And in the meantime, we are not serving upwards of 90% of our victims. And that makes us all unsafe. Because victims of crime, when they are not treated well, when they are not given the services they need, oftentimes become perpetrators of crime. And so whatever your incentive is, whether it's victims or money, that's how I have to talk to people. It's costing us a lot, we're getting nothing, and we're not doing the things that we're real about. And the interventions aren't just about releasing everybody from the prisons and making people hold hands. It's literally about like getting adequate health care to children and recognizing that school is a place where we're losing lots of kids because we don't know how to treat kids who are living in poverty who come to school every day because we don't give people the proper equipment to do so.
Hi, my name is Marie Richardson. I was actually born on Bowden Street in Dorchester.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Four Corners.
But, yeah. But now I work in the Pittsfield schools, and I am beyond thrilled that they're looking at the diversion programs in the courts. A lot of the kids I work with are kids that you talked about today that we don't hold in school, we lose them, and they fall apart. And I just am hoping as a school community, what we can do better. I know the restorative practice we talk about, and we are starting that, we are doing it, but kind of the pipeline of getting the kids out of school and they end up in jail, or when they do some time for stupid things, then their future's done. You know, they come out of lockup and there's nothing. You know, they can't get a job, they can't do anything. And I guess even just a small thing for us to start as a school community, what can we do?
Yeah. How do you spend the first hour of your day at school?
With kids. I'm
I
a
mean,
social worker, so I have kind of an open door.
Yeah, but
So
like, what is the rest of the school during the first hour of school when kids are getting?
class?
Like, what? You're taking kids from like living in poverty, you put them on a bus or however they get to school, and then you're like, trigonometry. That's stupid. Like, that's not a good use of our time. One, because this kid is never going to need trigonometry in their life, and two, because you were trying to teach someone who has a bunch of hormones in their bodies that are filling up their tiny developing brains that has nothing to do with them except the environment they live in. And we're trying to force math down their throat. Why don't we, I don't know, take the first hour to like do some mindfulness, talk about what's going on at home, eat a snack, maybe like take a nap, and then just see what happens. I would love to see your history curriculum and the pictures that are in your school of the people who made our country. Because like taking some of those down and replacing them with black people other than like Martin Luther King and Obama, like there are more black people that have contributed to this country than those two gentlemen. Like make school a more welcoming environment for kids that don't fit like the George Washington norm of excellence. Little things like that. Having, I don't know, like instead of showing whatever the hottest Taylor Swift thing is at school assemblies, like, I don't know, maybe talk about something that has something to do with other people's communities. Maybe having an honest conversation, an open conversation with young people who we disrespect all of the time. We take away their agency all the time because they're like, you're too young to talk about this. Maybe, I don't know, just like let them show you how smart they are and how capable they are of talking about things like native genocide. Talking about like what Mount Rushmore actually is. Talking to them about like all of the things that are true about our country, including the bad stuff, and letting them sort out like, what do I need to take out of this place and what don't I? But the people who have the most amount of privilege are the people who are making the schools run. And like, if you are every day just trying to do something, just cover a little bit of space for kids to feel safe, and to have people recognize that the energy and the behavior they're manifesting is not because they're bad or stupid, it's because like we've decided one way to evaluate kids in school, when really like there are many other ways to express their genius, and oftentimes that energy and that frustration is just like, you're not challenging me enough. Just finding ways to constantly be challenging the powers that be to define success maybe in more than like, you got straight A's here.
I'm in an environmental planning class, and we had a whole class on zoning, and we talked about ADU units and vocab words, and nothing about redlining or racist mortgage practices or white flight or anything about that. And I, after class, had a conversation with my professor about that. But I, in general, was wondering, like, how do I get professors to talk more about, like, the problematic history of, like, the theoretical things that we're talking about and the problematic practice that they have in the real world when they're like, oh, but I have content to cover.
Yeah. You know, this is like, I have content to cover, yeah. You are consumers of a product. And like, if I buy a car, and my car isn't the thing that I bargained for, I can go back to the dealership and be like, give me my money back, because this car is a piece of shit. You're paying an extreme amount of money as a consumer to get something, and you're being deprived of it. And so you, and probably your parents, need to start banging on the doors of not your professor, but your professor's boss's bosses, and saying, hey, you know what, when my daughter leaves this place, you know, you're never gonna see from me a single dollar. I'm not gonna be a donor to a place that deprived my kid of like an actual education. Just want you to know that. Oh, and not just her, but all of her other friends too, because all of the parents have gotten together and realized that our kids are not being equipped with the things that they need, and you're gonna have a really angry set of like alumni. And you don't want that. Because, to my friend's point again, like, that's the power that you have. Nobody gives a shit if my parents are like, hey, give us our, like, no, we don't have that political capital. We don't have that economic capital. Your parents do. I'm making very general assumptions, just allow me to. But like, you know what I'm saying. It's just like, you are consumers of a product that you're not getting the benefit of your bargain for, and so you can get your money back, or whatever that looks like. But really, like, do not leave this place without talking to the board of trustees. Your professor's great, but your professor has lots of people to answer to, and it's not them that's being forced with that content. It comes from the top. Go to the top, the people that are making the money off the money that you're spending, and saying to them, like, this money pipeline is going to be cut off, and I will make sure that none of the young people that are also in my life who are thinking about going to Williams are going to get a good report from me. That is your power, that is your privilege, that's your shield when it comes to this very economic, capitalistic educational system that we've created. We actually have power in that they need us more than we need them. Okay? Time for one more? Yeah? Pass it down.
Relatedly, I am wondering about how, in addition to like using our personal swords and shields that we have, and especially have as students like at an institution like Williams, and also using that power to make change within Williams, like how should we or how can we basically leverage Williams's power as an institution to create change?
Yeah. Does anybody know why all the images from the civil rights movement were captured between the hours of like 6 a.m. and 11 a.m.? Like everything that you see in the civil rights movement actually happened at like a very specific time of day. Anybody know why? Nope. Not why people were going to work. Why? Like the civil rights movement was like a campaign for people to see what was going on, right? It was like exposing these things to the rest of the world. And there was one way to do that. It was on the evening news. They had to get it done by 11 a.m. so it could get on the evening news. And that's why the civil rights movement, like everything that you see is happening first thing in the morning. This generation of people has the power to create civil rights movements whenever you want to because it's sitting in your pocket. You have the opportunity to like make a civil rights issue like that if you get enough people in your circle to get together and be like, yo, tweet this. What do you snap now? You're like snapping? This is where I'm like old. If you are an ambassador of Williams College, then you need to demand from Williams College that you get something for that ambassadorship. Like I don't go into DA's offices and let them like pimp out my platform without them giving me something on the back end, and that back end is like giving them access through their prosecutors to build. You have the opportunity to build a movement all of the time. And you can do that not by like sitting in your room and complaining about it, or not just like sitting with the people who totally agree with you. It's about organizing those people and challenging structures of power that have existed forever. And I'll say this to you, there are way more of you than there are of them. Everything that you're seeing in this country is the fear of losing that power and control that we have forever. And we're on a tipping point of finally piercing through that and breaking it, and you're on the front line. That's why I'm here. To help you recognize and understand that power that you have, to take it and to use it every single day, not just when you graduate, but every single day, because there is going to be an opportunity where you're going to pass by someone, and because they are different than you, they didn't have the space, that you're never going to be able to get back what you've lost, not by interacting with them. Every empty seat in this place is one of those people. And that should be fodder for you to want to go out and do this exact thing that you're talking about. Leverage everything that you have. The fact that I'm a, Harvard Law School, visiting fellow and all those things, those aren't in my bio for hype. Those are in my bio so that people know, like, if you don't come correct, I have a network of power around me that's going to hear about this. Use that. That's what you paid for. I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much for coming to see me.